and greetings. This is Asar Imhotep, and you are now listening to another exciting show of Simba Simbi, where we hold up that which holds you up. Today we have kind of a controversial topic, so to speak, where we will be discussing ancient mythology, the deeper aspects of the characters within mythology using the Satan character from the biblical myth. We're going to go back and try to trace its roots to see if we can get a better understanding of that particular character within the biblical myth and to see basically how to read ancient mythology. Today's topic title is called Satan Isn't Such a Bad Guy. And I named it that is actually a topic or the title of an article that is part of my book, which is called Exodus, Internal Reflections and Conversations with the Sun, a study in contemporary philosophy and poetry. So it's a dual book for all of the historians and philosophers with various articles and things of that nature, which is interlaced as well with some of the poetry. So I know this is going to be kind of controversial for some individuals. So, you know, we got to kind of outline the rules for everybody so we know exactly what we're dealing with here. We will be discussing the nature of Satan. We are not going to do any kind of Satan worship on this program. We are not affiliated with the Church of Satan. We will not discuss any kind of conspiracies, 666, the Masonic Order, signs and symbols of the dollar bill, or if Barack Obama is the Antichrist. We are not here to say how right we are and how wrong you are. What we seek to do today is to explore the deeper meanings behind ancient mythological characters using Satan as an example to look beyond the veil of metaphor and to understand possibly what the original authors are trying to convey. We will do this through the disciplines of history, philosophy, linguistics, and comparative cosmology to hopefully get a better understanding from a multidisciplinary approach. I would like to welcome everyone who has entered into the chat room, Denise and Conscious Vibrations, and everyone. This week we're not going to have, I guess, a specific call-in guest. I will be going based upon my article in notes, but I want to remind everyone that this is a call-in show. The number to call is 347-326-9377. That is 347-326-9377. But I would advise that we wait for questions until about 30 to 40 minutes into the program so we can get the basic outline and then we can dialogue. This is one man's interpretation based upon his own research. So one of the things that I would like to do is to dialogue with everyone so we can exchange what we've been studying so we can refine our understanding of ancient myths. Essentially, when we talk about the Satan character, it is best that we understand it from its phenomenological standpoint. And for people who don't know what phenomenology is, it is essentially the study of experience. It seeks to try to understand how we experience through the first person. And what I argue is that myths are designed to help the individual experience in the first person through the lens and the eyes of the characters through the myth. And there's several different aspects of philosophy in which kind of all come together from the ancient days, which helps us to better understand certain concepts from certain ancient people. We usually break down these particular studies in modern times. These are the modern labels for it, of ontology, epistemology, logic, ethics, and phenomenology. And in short, Ontology is the study of beings in their being. In essence, it's the study of what is. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. We essentially ask the question, how do we know what we know? And do we know what we know is to be real or to be truthful, in essence? Logic more so deals with the study of valid reasoning. How do we reason? Logic dealing with order, hierarchy, putting things into logical patterns and things of that nature. Ethics deals with the study of right or wrong. How should we act? How should we treat one another? What is morally correct behavior or whatnot? And I explain what phenomenology is, which is the study of our experiences. How do we experience? And what I would like to stress right now is the essence of myths. Now, there's probably some of y'all listening right now who would argue that the biblical myths are true and that they're not myths at all. I'm not here to argue whether the events in the Bible happened or not. That is for biblical scholars to sit there and argue. What I seek to do as a person who does cosmological comparative studies is to look at the stories themselves with no regards to its historical significance. Well, I shouldn't say with no regards to its historical significance, but with little worry about how historical the story is, and to focus more so on the actual teachings and to see what kind of jewels are hidden in these particular stories. I've always been fascinated with myths and stories from an early age when I used to write short stories and things to myself. So as an artist, as a poet, as a student of metaphor, it's just habit for me to look beyond the veil of what is obvious in a story. So this is what fuels my research into this particular topic. So I guess the first thing we need to do is to define what a myth is. And, you'll get various different definitions of what a myth is, and people usually attribute myths to be false stories. And it's usually from this Greek word, which comes from mythos. It really deals with speech, thought, stories, or whatnot. Some people will call them rumors or untrue stories, but that's not necessarily the case. Most myths are just unique, basically extended metaphors, which brings attention to a phenomenon or a force in nature which doesn't necessarily have a physical representation. So what they'll do in a myth is personify forces to teach how these forces or how these concepts in nature and the universe interact with each other. So that's the nature, and that's what kind of fuels myths. So with that in mind, we will I have a few notes as far as some great philosophers and historians and what they've said about myths. And I want y'all to kind of pay attention to the dynamics of these particular stories. Now, as Northrop Frye would say in The Great Code, if anybody's familiar with him, he says there are and remain two aspects of myth. One is its story structure, which attaches it to literature. The other is its social function as concerned knowledge. What is important for society to know? In essence, what he's saying is there's two aspects to the story. Dealing with literature, and then one deals with the important social function. I guess I'm dealing with morals and ethics, as with earlier, and how that we can learn from these particular lessons and how we can apply them in our social reality. As Joseph Campbell in an interview said, he said a mythology is a system of effect symbols, signs evoking and directing psychic energies. It is more like an effective artwork than a science proposition. As John Frederick Nims describes myth in his book Western Inn, An Introduction to Poetry, we still like to make up stories, just as our ancestors did, which use personification to explain the great forces of our existence. Such stories which explain how the world began or where the sun goes when it sets, we call myths. Mythology is a natural product of the symbolizing mind. Poets, when not making up myths of their own, are still commanding ancient ones. And, these are just various different ways in which these poets and these philosophers articulate the dynamics and the characteristics of what makes a myth. And this subject is important because, and I'll introduce another term which we pretty much only use in academia. It's called pedagogy. And when you're talking about pedagogy, you're talking about a teaching style. And we do not have the same pedagogical methods of teaching and learning that our ancient people did. Now, this is one of the things that we have to keep in mind, that when these stories first were circulating, the majority of the people could not read or write, or the societies in which these myths developed, they had no writing. So if you have no writing, how do you pass on information? The best way to do that is through myths, through poetry and the like. Their memories were a lot more sharper than ours now. Because we have written records, we don't store as much, or we don't feel the need to store as much information in our brains as did the ancients. Whereas it was a matter of, if I can summarize, a life or death for them to hold this particular type of information. But for us, since we can just Google all information, or we can, go to the library and just, fill with books instead of talking to elders, we don't store as much in our brains as possible. So this is why myths are so prevalent, and so important back in ancient times. And I was coming across doing just some research for this particular discussion today, and it's an individual who wrote about learning styles and why we're having such a hard time in schools now when trying to teach kids. And one of the things that he was talking about was that we've kind of abandoned the mythological, the poetic method of teaching. And it is because of this, which is not in alignment with how our humans learn in general, we have been doing a disservice to our young people while trying to teach them. I was going to read a little bit of it, and hopefully you'll get a better understanding. Now, what he's talking about in this particular segment in which I'm reading is more so dealing with teaching people how to write well. And the whole article was really about the myth of people who read well, write well. And what he's arguing is that myth is not true, and this is the reason why. Skipping down, he says, because linguistic information is best stored in the brain auditorially, children who have read to them reliably corrected language patterns for many years are much more likely to develop competence in writing and verbal communication skills. However, there is a not-so-sagacious teachings arsenal, memorized poetry. There is perhaps no greater tool than memorization to seal language patterns in the human brain, and there is perhaps nothing more effective than poetry to provide exactly what we want, reliably correct and sophisticated language patterns. Although rote memorization and recitation went out of vogue when the great god of creativity, quote-unquote, began to dominate ideology in the schools of education, it has stood for centuries, even millennia, as the most powerful way to teach, to learn, to develop skills, and to preserve knowledge. By memorizing and reciting, you practically fuse neurons into permanent language storage patterns. Those patterns are then readily to be used, combined, adapted, and applied to express ideas in a myriad of ways. Additionally, because of the nature of poetry, poets are often compelled to stretch our vocabulary, utilizing words and expressions in uniquely sophisticated but almost always correct language patterns. A child with a rich repertoire of memorized poetry will inevitably demonstrate superior linguistic skills, both written and spoken, because of those patterns which are so deeply ingrained in the brain. Now, all of this to really reinforce this whole concept is that people learn best by listening, one, and it being put in a poetic, metaphoric fashion to be able to relate concepts to things that doesn't seem to be related. And, education, for anybody who's an educator, know that education is about synthesis, about taking all of the elements in which we interact with and showing how they relate to each other and how they interact with each other. That's the essence of myth, and that's the essence of what we're dealing with today. So, just getting to this, what I'm arguing today is that this whole concept of Satan, everybody thinks that Satan is some spiritual single being who is out there murdering, killing, lying, and making people do all kinds of weird things. As a student of philosophical and cosmological history, I can tell you that the story about, Satan being thrown out of heaven because he thought he was more beautiful and wanted to be God is not part of the biblical tradition. That was part of some other books, which, and I don't even think it's part of the Apocrypha books, which was thrown out as heresy, which actually was written at a later date. But you would not find that concept in the particular story. What you will find is that the Satan character works in conjunction with, God in the biblical myth. But where does Satan come from? What are his attributes? What does the name mean? Now, once again, I'm not here to argue biblical truth, biblical beliefs. What I'm here to do is introduce a historical transition. A lot of us know who basically study world history and world religions is that a lot of the elements that come out of the biblical tradition actually come out of Tameri. Tameri is one of the ancient names for Egypt, along with Kemet, along with Hindu, along with Ta-Seti, and a host of myriad names, Merita. But, they all come out of this particular tradition. And Satan actually is the biblical concept that was taken from the deity known as Set in the ancient Egyptian tradition. And what, I would like to do now is basically kind of introduce the characteristics of who Set was. Now, for those who are just joining us, the topic for today is Satan isn't such a bad guy, unveiling basically the myths surrounding behind the Satan character. And this is actually the title of a chapter in my book, Exodus, Internal Reflections and Conversations with the Sun, Volume 1. For those who want more information on that book, if you are on Simba Simbi Blog Talk website, just look towards the bottom. You'll see a photo of the cover of the book and some information on the side and some links where you can find out more information and read some chapters. But from what we know, the oldest record or the oldest recorded spiritual system is that of the Nile Valley Africans, which became widely practiced between the times of around, let's say, 10,000 and 4,100 BCE. Set belongs to a greater pantheon in the story of Ra, Asar, Aset, Set, Nephthep, Anpu, and Heru, which became well known in ancient Egypt and went through many transformations. These systems were always concerned with the laws of opposites and the building of strong character, and we need to keep that in mind as far as this whole concept of character is concerned. One of the major characters in the Asar, Aset, and Heru drama of ancient Talmeres was that of Set. Remember that in spiritual myths, the gods represented forces in nature and were not actual personages. So the most important thing for us to pay attention to is that, as far as the myth is concerned, is that these particular characters were just personifications of forces in nature. And the myth was there simply to show you how everything interacts with each other in nature as a teaching method, as a form of pedagogy, as we explained earlier. Set is the brother of Asar and the uncle of Heru. The myth of Asar set in Hebrew is quite long, so I'm not going to go through all the details here. For those who want to know and read the whole expansive Asarian resurrection myth, I would actually recommend, what's his name, Dr. Muata Ashby. He has a book called Resurrecting Osiris. And, you know, he has taken the time and labor because it's actually not one story. It's various stories in which, you know, you don't get a full story when you're reading the Egyptian papyri. So you got to kind of, you know, take bits of the story from here, take bits of the story from this papyrus and that one and this pyramid text and these coffin texts and, you know, put the whole story together. And that's exactly what Dr. Muata Ashby has done. And once again, that book is called Resurrecting Osiris. But Set, because of his egoistic nature, murders his brother Asar and attempts to usurp the throne of Kemet. Set represents the lower nature in mankind. He is intelligence without wisdom. He is impulsiveness and reckless, passionate behavior that stunts the spiritual growth of every human being. Set was adopted by the Greeks and was called Seth. That's S-E-T-H. Set later was brought into the Christian myth and renamed Satan. In the Christian system, Satan is the personification of evil and is the sole entity responsible for the world's suffering. Now, when we break down the word Set and look at his other characteristics, because they don't actually necessarily define Set in the Egyptian tradition, but one of his attributes, what they call him, is Tisi. And remember that usually they didn't say their vowels in the word, so you would spell it T-S-I in essence. T-S-I is equivalent to one who deserts, someone who abandons or is disloyal or hates friends. A good book that I would recommend that everybody who's trying to get some information on Seth is a book by Herman T. Velde, and the book is called Seth, God of Confusion. Again, that is Herman T. Velde, Seth, God of Confusion. Another characteristic about Seth is that they give him the title of Tish. We don't know how to fully say the word, but we have the consonants of T-C-H. And what it represents is the intoxicating power of beer. And for those of you who can read Meta Nature, you know, it has the loaf of bread with the placenta symbol, and then the determinative is a vase of beer. And we can look into the Leighton Papyrus, and it gives us a little bit of insight into the characteristics of Seth. When you read the Leighton Papyrus, it'll say, Seth will be irrestrainable when he wishes to conquer the heart, and this his name of beer. He confuses the heart to conquer the heart of the enemy, the evildoer, the male and the female dead person. Seth, who's the instigator of confusion, deserter, drunkard, those are, you know, his attributes again. And, you know, there's still some confusion on the linguistics as far as the essay causative prefix, but that's going into some linguistic jargon, which is not important at this particular time. But in essence, from what we get when we read the Leighton Papyrus, is that Set represents the force that causes confusion, in essence. What I argue is, and based upon my own personal studies and then just studies with people from the continent, is that this particular character actually represents what we call in modern day physics as the concept of entropy. And for those who don't know what entropy is, entropy when it comes to, and there's many different modes of entropy, but entropy in thermodynamics is the measure of dispersed energy when two thermal systems interact with each other of differing temperatures. And back in the day, they used to say entropy was equivalent to chaos or disorder. So it's kind of, you know, saying veered away from that in essence. But as far as the social dynamics of it all, it pretty much stands true. So this is the kind of term that we use to represent, in modern times to represent the ancient concept of Set. So they didn't have the word entropy. They just said Set. So, you know, we got to keep in mind what all of this means in the particular story when we talk about Set interacting with, the upper, saying higher natures. One thing I would like to stress again is that when we're dealing with ancient myths, because we don't deal in the same pedagogical methods of the old, we kind of miss out because we don't go through the same processes of learning as the ancient people did. In the ancient days, you actually went through a process which is called initiation. And during your initiation, you were introduced to this, what I call the surface level of all the myths. Now, the surface is what, most people get in churches, synagogues, temples, mosques, whatever. Those who are initiated actually, after their initiation and they continue into their studies, get taught the deeper aspects of what the introduction means. The introduction of the myths in which everybody is familiar with just sets the foundation, so you keep it in memory, so you have a reference point for when they're talking about the greater myths. And it is no different when it comes to the Bible. What a lot of people don't understand is that the Bible is not a text for everybody. It was originally a text for initiates. Now everybody has access to it. They got the stories, but they don't have the deeper aspects of what the stories mean because they are not all in initiation schools, which, with a lineage of particular well-educated priests in the system who can actually inform the initiates on what these particular stories mean. And I'm looking in the chat room right now, and somebody is asking, is APEP, in essence, the same as Set? And basically, yes. It is a characteristic of what, but APEP and Set, there, APEP is really just, one of the Greek names for Set. So, you would deal with the same, characteristics as Set is what I spoke of earlier. So, what I want to get into now is basically the ancient perspective. So, when we're dealing with this whole concept of Satan, and what we're going to do is get into the whole concept of what the Garden of Eden is and how can we break down the story, and then we're going to open it up a little bit for question and answer. And I want to stress again that this is a call-in show, and after I finish this little segment, I want to open it up, so please do not hesitate to call if you have any questions. Because I have a whole bunch of notes, I may or may not actually be in the chat room, to catch your questions. So if you do have a question, please call in, and I will answer it the best as I can. If I can't, I will refer you to some people who can. But continuing on with the particular lesson. In the ancient myths, the objective was not to look at the characters in the stories as distant personages who have these worthwhile experiences that don't relate to us. The objective for the initiate to internalize the characters and to relate them to one's life. Set and Heru are not different people. They are aspects of you reading the story. Set represents your lower nature, and the story is designed to show you how to have your lower nature serve your more divine, higher nature, which is Heru, Asar, Asset, different aspects of who we are as human beings. The same objective was expressed in the Christian myth through the story of Satan. Satan has been given many names and attributes. His most notable are devil and demon. And I think it is time that we define what these terms are and to look at their etymological roots. For those who don't know what the word devil is, the word devil actually comes from a Greek word diabolos, which means slanderer, or literally one who throws something across the path of another. And we're going to get into that a little bit deeper later. The other word that characterizes Satan usually is the word demon, which comes from the Greek daimonion, which means a divine principle or inward oracle. And once again, I can't stress enough how important it is when you're reading stories to always to look for the titles of the names, the meanings of the names of the and the characteristics which are attributed to the characters in the myths, because they explain a lot. This is why a lot of people missed all of the deeper stuff in the Matrix film, because they did not want to take the time and actually research who the characters were. But the definition of these words, when contemplated deeply, have connotations that were not understood by those who were not initiated into the priesthood. Modern churches today have given a false perception of what Satan is and his function in our lives, according to the ancients. I hope to bring about basically a paradigm shift in thinking so that we may use the Satan energy to our benefit. Now, today people take myths literally, and it has done a disservice to the spiritual community because proper interpretation hasn't been explained to the layman. People think that an entity named Satan exists and he is an enemy of God. They believe there is an intergalactic war between God and his creation, but they never stop to think that if Satan was so bad, why hasn't God gotten rid of him yet? For those that believe in the biblical text, why would God kill off humanity several times? The story of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah are just a few examples, but not get rid of the person, quote unquote, responsible for the evil. The reason why is because Satan actually represents a fundamental concept in nature. For there to be good, there must be bad. There is no cold without hot. There is no here without there, large without small. To destroy Satan would be to destroy creation itself. For what will you reference when you speak about all things that are good? There is no good without evil, which explains why, he is never killed off in the myth. We are here on earth to have experiences that are designed for the development of higher consciousness. There is no growth without struggle. What we call evil was put into this realm to force us to strive for better things. Otherwise, we would get complacent and there is no spiritual growth. This is the secret behind the Garden of Eden story. It was a myth to explain to the initiates that in perfection there is death, there is no growth. Satan was used as a force to kick man out of his comfort zone so he could have experiences that promote spiritual growth and understanding. If you notice in the Bible, Satan doesn't commit any acts. Man does all of the evil. People misinterpret influence and choice with actions that are forced. All Satan ever did was give mankind a choice to do right or wrong. This leads us back to our first definition of devil, one who throws something across the path of another. The usage of the word devil is a pun on this definition. When someone throws or actually speaks something at you, they are bringing to your attention an idea. We say it all the time in common speech, like, hey, son, let me throw something at you real quick. Now, all you're saying is, let me introduce you to this concept or option. So in other words, a devil is somebody who gives you options or introduces you to options that force you, in essence, to make a choice or a decision. So the devil's job is, once again, to give us options, to give us situations in which we are forced to use our free will to make a choice. His other characteristic is that of a demon. The word demon, again, comes from daimonion, which means divine principle or inward oracle. This lets us know that it is not an external entity, but an internal being that is trying to tell us something. In other words, what they're trying to do is tell us that the devil and a demon are aspects of ourselves, trying to force us to strive for a higher consciousness, to be with our Creator and things of this nature. For those of you who meditate quite often, you will notice that when you do meditate, and if you're honest with yourself, that you will hear, at minimum, two voices. And, that's a discussion, that's, I guess, a lecture in itself, which we won't go into. But we hear these voices that tell us certain things. Some people say it's our own spirits. Some people say it's our ancestors. Some people say it's God itself. At this particular point, I'm not going to say yay or nay to any of them. But, we understand that there's something that's in us that urges us to do things. And, this is one aspect of it, a daimonion, a demon, which is an oracle telling you what is to come and things of that nature. So now we have to ask the question, if God is divine and all things it creates is divine, and if he created Satan, then Satan is divine. Satan forces you to realize the inconsistencies in your own character so that you can address those issues. He brings these issues to surface. This is divine because he gets to make you admit that it was you that did the bank robbery, not some invisible spirit. It was you that was cheating on your husband, not some demon. It was you that bought the liquor bottle. 50 Cent, Ice Cube, Nas didn't make me do it. It was you who made the choice. It is like pain in your body. And this is how I articulate the force, because Set represents many different forces, whether they be on the social plane, in nature, or what is a biological as far as your body is concerned. And I attribute it to pain as well. And we know that pain is a mechanism in your body that tells the brain that there is an area of the body that is not in harmony with the whole. The brain is supposed to recognize what the problem is and signal to the spirit that we need to address this quickly or something damaging is going to happen to our body. You wouldn't call the pain in your stomach evil. It is simply doing its job. Although painful for you, it is a necessary component of existence. It is a very smart mechanism of the body. And if we didn't have pain, people would just drop dead with no warning because something was wrong and there was nothing to signal to the self that something was wrong in the first place. That, in essence, is what Satan is here to do. Satan, or the force which Satan represents, or Set represents, or Seth in the Greek represents, and in the Greek they also associate him later on with their deity Typhon. But what all of these different aspects of the myth represent is that aspect of nature that lets you know that something is going wrong. And if you don't correct it, you will die, in essence, without fulfilling your purpose. So this brings us deeper into, now when we come to this whole concept of initiation. Because when you can admit that you are the reason for all your wrongdoings, then you are ready for initiation. You have now matured to the point in which spiritual development can take place. Satan is not bad. He is actually necessary in this realm of existence. It just takes a paradigm shift in your thinking to understand what a Seth, Satan is supposed to represent in nature, and to use that knowledge to your advantage and grow with the experience. In the story of Set, Asar, and Heru, Set isn't destroyed. He is made to steer the boat of Ra and protect the boat from chaos. Now, these are all, signs and symbols in the greater myth. And once again, the myth of Asar is really quite long, so, we don't have time to really go through it. But according to the mythology, the boat simply just represents the mechanism that actually moves time forward, if you get what I'm saying. So Set, controlling that actually lets us know another aspect of it. He keeps time moving. He keeps people striving for the future, in essence. So you notice when a whole bunch of bad stuff happens to you, you are compelled to do something so you won't have the experiences again. You always are reaching for equilibrium, but we can't have equilibrium. Equilibrium is death. And anybody who's a mathematician listening to this will understand that in the form of limits when we start doing various trigonomic and calculus equations. And we map them out, on our Texas instruments. And you always see the line approaching infinity or approaching zero, but never quite hitting it. And that's, in essence, what exists in the universe, so to speak. But in the story, Set isn't killed. He isn't thrown to hell in the Egyptian myth. He is made to serve humanity in the final analysis. And Set and Heru actually reconcile their differences in the end of the story, and learn how to live with each other. There's actually two stories that's like that in the Bible as well. The one that I can think of right off the bat has to deal with Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau is another metaphor for the same particular concept. Again, they go through their drama, but at the end, you find that they reconcile, hug, and make good. And they learn how to live with each other. And this is, in essence, what this particular story is talking about. So, the next time you eat that foot-long hoagie, or remember that your heart, started hurting, it was from acid reflux. If we want to put it in mythological terms, we would just say that it's Set, trying to warn us, put the hoagie down. This isn't good for your heart. I'm giving you this pain to signal to you that if you do this, you ain't going to be here much longer. We need to pay attention to the energy. Satan is not a concept to be worshipped. It's to be recognized and respected, and to understand that, when we come across this entropy in our life, that this is, we need to pay attention and to look for the lesson. So, once again, Satan's job is to provide us with choices to exercise our free will so we can overcome obstacles to develop spiritually, and set forces us to admit our shortcomings so we can be ready for spiritual transformation. And for this, we must understand that the energy force is neither bad nor good. It is what it is. And in essence, that's basically, all I have to say, as far as that. And I would love for anybody to, call in and give me their feedback on this particular subject, or if you have a question in the chat room, we can go from there. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to come back. So hopefully, y'all will have questions or whatnot. We heard earlier the sounds of Flying Lotus, and that particular track was called Orbital Brazil. I'm gonna switch it up. Q-Tip has a new album, out, so I want to play the new jam off of that. So this is Q-Tip's Getting Up. I'll be back in a few. Peace, and we are back. You are listening to Simba Radio, and I'm your host, Asar Imhotep, and we are discussing the biblical myth, particularly dealing with Satan character and Set in the Egyptian myth, and Set, or I guess the Greek pronunciation of Set. And I basically, read off bits and pieces of my article in my book, Exodus, Internal Reflections and Conversations with the Sun, and some other notes, and just, going through, I guess, a question and answer period now. So if you are listening and you were able to catch the show, and you have a call or comment, please give us a call at 347-326-9377. That is 347-326-9377. And we have a caller on the line from area code 216. Are you there, caller?
Yes, I am. I want to ask you a question. The
right.
aspect of Capricorn, because I was typing it in the room, the aspect of Capricorn and the aspects of the goat, dealing with the Satan figure. So we actually got, for each representation of resurrection, death, in the seasons of the year. So it's really kind of odd that they would give us Capricorn that starts the winter solstice, that deal with coldness, and the element is lead. So I was going to ask you, what correlation in the Tarot deck can you put with, like the Capricorn or the Baphomet or the Pan, and also put it with the devil, because the Pan was also a god before, it was overtook and they demonized it. So just wanted to ask you, do you see a correlation in that, like I was looking at it? That's all.
All righty. Well, one, thank you for calling in and asking the question. That is not necessarily my area of expertise. Who I would recommend for that, he's one of our previous guests, and if you send me your information, I will give you his email. His name is Baba Shango Dare. And, astrology, his thing, I'm more of like a numerology type person, but I don't want to answer you wrong. I do know when it comes to the aspects of Capricorn and the goat and things of this nature, a lot of what you see out there is actually a sign, some stories dealing with Freemasonry and, riding a goat and all this other kind of stuff for people who are Freemasons and Eastern Stars. So, that is subject matter which I wouldn't speak about openly, out of respect for, the teachings, in essence. So this essence for initiation. But the person who, on an astrological tip, that would actually be able to answer that is one of our regular guests. His name is Baba Shango Dare, and that's all he deals with. He's an Ifa priest out of Houston, Texas. So I'll be more than happy to give you his information. And maybe you can come back and tell us. All I know is that when it comes to certain signs, they represent certain transitions. So there's really only 2 seasons and 2 transitions in most places. So it could just signify, the transition, being prepared, to go into that new, era. And, of course, everything deals with the cycles of life, of conception, birth, development, and death, and everything coming back full circle. So in that essence, I know I can't fully answer your question, but, and then him being associated with Satan, that is something, the best website that I would say that would probably answer that and why the connections are there in modern times is probably the churchofsatan.com. If you do that, because they have that in the upside down, saying star and all this other kind of stuff, and they, probably be able to articulate the symbolism. From my understanding, as far as Set is concerned, his actual signs when you read the Egyptian temples is actually, several things, either a jackal, and this is still an argument in Egyptological circles. It's either a jackal, a dog, saying wolf. Some people say it's a donkey, but for the most part, people agree that it's a canine type animal. So, in the other traditions, and how would it be associated with a goat, and Satan, that isn't, an African tradition, or that isn't a part of the African tradition, so to speak. So, once again, give me a... All right, you're welcome. Once again, if you have any questions, give me a call, 347-326. I'm about to give my personal number out now, but 347-326-9377. There was a question in the chat room by Conscious Vibrations, and hopefully it did not get out just as yet, but he's asking basically, can you explain the significance concerning hell and heaven based on Heru Set from our personal perspective? That is actually going to be a lot more difficult than it seems, for the simple reason that you're dealing with various different traditions in ancient Kemet. And this is the mistake that everybody makes in ancient Kemet, thinking that it was one central cohesive system, and it was not. It is actually a conglomerate of various different African traditions at various times in its, 3,000 to 4,000 political history. So, with that said, a good book that I recommend is Dr. Shekhar Tijok's Civilization or Barbarism. He has a chapter there where he breaks down the heaven and hell concept according to the ancient Egyptians. But the thing is, he basically does it from the standpoint in an Egyptological way. But because he didn't necessarily, or if he did have the knowledge of what I'm about to say now, he didn't articulate it in that book. But if you want to know where the actual reliefs are, where you can actually see the whole concept in the ancient Egyptian reliefs, I would recommend Civilization of Barbarism by Dr. Shekhar Tijok. He has it in there, and I don't have the book actually in my possession where I'm located right now. It's in my storage. Otherwise, I give you the page number. But what we got to understand from our particular perspective, let's say, and I'm going to give you the Dogon and I'm going to give you the Zulu cosmological story. They tell us in their particular story, and actually in the ancient Egyptian they tell you that, but more so you get the articulation in the Greek version of the Asar Imhotep story. Once again, I recommended a book by Dr. Muata Ashby earlier called Resurrecting Osiris. He has a little bit of an excerpt of a longer story from the Greeks called The Virgin of the World. This is what I would recommend that you study, for the question that you asked. And once again, it's you can find it on like sacred-text.com. It's called the Sacred of it's the the virgin of the world. It's the Greek version of the story. But they tell you there, and that story actually matches what you find up there in the Dogon tradition and what you find down south amongst the Zulu tradition. And is that we existed as spirit beings or as some other entity in another star system, usually Sirius, or what the ancient Egyptians called Suba, and they still call it in many of the various Bantu languages. They call it Suba. It's a particular star system. That's what they call Sirius, and we know from the Dogon tradition how important Sirius is. We don't know too much about how important Sirius is in the Zulu tradition. All of these particular instances say that we used to live there, and that we were, I think we killed, somebody there in essence, or there was a big murder. It was that we weren't up to par as far as our behavior was concerned, so we were banished to this place. So what they'll say is that in essence, where we are now is hell, and the whole point of religion and spirituality is for you to develop yourself so you can get back to the place in which you were. You'll find this once again in the Zulu tradition, and for a good book, I'm always recommending books where you can find this particular story. I would advise that everybody pick up the book, and I hope you have your pens and papers ready, and I'll try to say it as slow as possible. It's by Credu Mutwa. It is called Indaba, My Children. You spell Indaba I-N-D-A-B-A. Once again, it's I-N-D-A-B-A. It's called Indaba, My Children. In that book, and I think he has, I'm looking around for my book right now. It's another book that he has. It's called Zulu Shaman, again, by Credu Mutwa. In both of these books, he gives the story of how we were banished, according to Zulu and other Bantu traditions, how we were banished from the star Sirius system. And we're here now trying to develop our to develop our spirits and our souls to a high standard of character where we can coexist with Nomo, the various fish-like deities, in this particular star system, which is really just code for some other things. But, most people are familiar with Nomo and Numo from the Dogon tradition, but they don't know that that same entity is also in the Zulu tradition. And in the book Zulu Shaman, he really goes and deals with that particular subject. So once again, those two books for the Zulu account is Zulu Shaman by Credu Mutwa, and the other one is Indaba, My Children. And some other books that I would recommend is The Science of the Dogon and Sacred Symbols of the Dogon, both written by an individual by the name of Laird Scraton. I highly recommend those books for everybody who's trying to get a deeper understanding of these particular traditions. So, in that aspect, to answer the question going for Brother Conscious Vibrations is, in these particular stories, we are actually in, hell. And it is our job to develop a high moral character so we can exist in the next plane. Now, of course, we know the other attributes of hell, heaven or hell, which is just conditions in which we set here on earth, and that's pretty much in any tradition. So, what they'll say is heaven is you being one, you being absorbed into the greater essence of what is the creator. We're more familiar with this in the Buddhist concept of nirvana, or actually Buddha. And, that's the whole goal of Hinduism and Buddhism, is to, stop the incarnations of life so our energy, would just be absorbed in the greater energy of the creator. And there's many, 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 many different stories that deals with this. So, I guess what I would articulate before I end that particular part of the segment is that, one of the things that we have to understand is the crux of our cosmological worldview across the continent. And what I'm going to do will help you to better understand it, but at the same time, it is damaging. Admittedly, it's going to be damaging primarily because we got to understand that Africa is a very big continent. And although there is strong similarities across the continent, there are, unique differences. And you will find unique differences in meanings in all of these particular nations and their cosmological worldview, dealing with cosmology, dealing with how the universe came into being and what is man's place in the universe in relationship to the creative essence which created everything. So, and this is how we summarize it, and this kind of ties in all into this this thing in which we're doing now. In the beginning, God was perfect. And this is before time and space. In the beginning, God was perfect. But at some point, he realized that he was imperfect and created this matrix, which we call the universe, so it could have experiences. And that is the crux, of everything. So one, it goes back to this particular science of perfection being death. There's no growth in perfection. There's no growth in equilibrium. So in essence, that's, how the ancient African people articulated why, the Creator created all of what we see here, and why in their cosmology they'll say that we are nothing but emanations of the Creator. We are here just to have experiences. So if anybody who's familiar with Professor James Smalls, usually at the beginning of his lectures, he'll say something to the nature of, I'm just God having a human experience. And, for me knowing him personally, this is based upon this particular concept of God, once being in perfection, realized that it was imperfect because it could not experience itself. So it created this matrix, which we call the universe, so it could have experiences. And that's the same philosophy which was being taught in the Garden of Eden. Eden was basically a heaven on earth. It was perfection. But in perfection, there was no growth. You don't learn anything. And this is when Set is introduced in the story. Set represents the force in nature that compels things to move forward, to strive for better things. And that's in essence, and it helps us to grow and learn and really understand the dynamics of what it is to live, what it is to be human, what it means to exist in this whole, universe. So, we learn through our experiences how to make heaven wherever we're at, with hell constantly on our back chasing us, in essence. And some have articulated in various different manners. And once again, if you're looking for a good summary, and actually these aren't even summaries, they go into great detail of our particular traditions, get the book Endowed by My Children and Zulu Shaman by Crady Mutua, and The Science of the Dogon and Sacred Symbols of the Dogon by Laird Scranton. So I hope, that in essence kind of answers the question. And if not, let me know. If anybody else has any questions in the chat room, let me know, and don't forget to call in. That number again is 347-326-9377. We approximately have 25 minutes left in the show, so I will take another break. And I just uploaded a whole bunch of jams tonight. So, matter of fact, this is going to be. Let me see. I'm gonna go out with Surface. This is before a lot of y'all time listening to this particular radio station, but give enough people to conjure up some more questions. I know there was some I got to go check in the chat room. So when we come back, we want to take another quick break, and we're going to come back. And don't forget to call in 347-326-9377. But this is Surface, Only You. Alrighty, we are back. Again, you are listening to Simba Simbi Radio, where we hold up that which holds you up. Today's topic being Satan isn't such a bad guy. If you are just joining us, pretty much read a little bit from the book Exodus, Internal Reflections and Conversations with the Sun. For those who want more information on the book and you are on the show, on the website listening, there's some information towards the bottom of the page where it has the book cover, and you can look at some of the chapters and check it out, or you can visit my website at www.asarimhotep.com, and you'll find all kinds of stuff when you get to the site as well. Someone just asked, do I have an online study group? Not really. I consider myself a student. I try to have these forums in which we can learn from each other, and that's what I like to engage in more so as a dialogue. And speaking of dialogue, you can call in so we can all dialogue, and because I learn from everybody else as much as I learn, or as much as they learn from me. So, and if I haven't set up the show physically yet, but on Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Time, that is 9 p.m. Eastern, we will have as our guest on the show, and I know I'm going to say the name wrong, but Brother Herpu Bigbaye Inej Nima. He is a initiate and head of the Earth Center, headed out of Chicago, which was founded and started by Master Naba, and I can never really pronounce his full name, but he's a Dogon priest he entered the ancestral realm actually in July. So he is no longer with us, for those who are not informed, but Master Naba made his transition in July. So Brother Herpu is, head of the center now, and he will be on the show to discuss the deeper aspects of Dogon cosmology, Kemetic history, and spirituality. And someone just asked, is that in Chi-Town? Yes, it is in Chi-Town, and I think they actually have different chapters now. I know one's in New York now as well, but the center is in Chicago. But once again, we will be discussing Dogon cosmology, ancient Kemetic culture and history, African spirituality, just the whole gamut, really introduce to everyone the concepts of the Earth Center out of Chicago. So please join in. Look for the date. The date will be, I got to look at a calendar now because I am not good with dates, but and my computer is acting slow. So, but it will be this coming Thursday. I think it's November the 7th, 2008 at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. The 6th, my bad, the 6th of November, Central Standard Time, 8 p.m. So if we do have any other questions, once again, please give us a call, 347-326-9377, or you can ask me in the chat room. Would like to shout some of our remaining members at Honey Love, Swap, Showcase Hope 99, come. Peace. I'm back. My phone just hung up on me earlier. So I hope the music was keeping y'all company. That was, of course, Bob Marley, I Shot the Sheriff, and before that was Flying Lotus, and the track was called Slow It Down. For y'all not familiar with Flying Lotus, real good producer DJ, the nephew of John Coltrane, dope cat out of L.A. we'll be ending the show soon. We got about 8 minutes left. Just a couple of quick announcements for those who are listening in and are in the chat room. You know, we kind of clown a lot in the chat room. So after this particular show, it's going to be the after party, in essence. It starts at 10 p.m. Central, and it's being hosted by Sister Iba Oshun. You can reach her on the Blog Talk Radio channels at blogtalkradio.com/poetic soul, POETHICSOUL. So blogtalkradio.com/poetic soul. And listen to some tight tunes, some tight poetry, call in and spit, you know, the whole nine. She's going to be holding it down for us later on tonight. For anybody that knows about my historical work and linguistic work, one of the major projects I'm working on right now is called Bantu Cosmology and the Origin of Egyptian Civilization, and it's going to be a great work. It's going to actually be done in a couple of years. Immediately, the next book that is going to come out is called Uba Imka Uha, Hypotheses and Reconceptualizations of Ancient Egyptian Culture and Philosophy. And Uba means to look, Imka means to study, and Uha means to awaken, observe, to unravel. So, in essence, what Uba Imka Uha means is to look, observe, study, and then unravel the mysteries of, you know, the ancient Egyptian texts or whatnot. So that's immediately come out. And then any of y'all who are members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the book that's coming out after that is called The Intellectual Traditions of Alpha Phi Alpha. And we have many great scholars who have contributed to this book, especially Brother Anthony T. Browder and Dr. Charles S. Finch. Brother Cornell West has sent something in, you know, and a whole host of other people. So be on the lookout for that particular book, and I will announce when that comes out. But once again, I would like to thank everyone who actually listened. If anybody wants to ask me any more specific questions, I'm very good at answering them via email, so hit me up at info@asarimhotep.com. That's info@asarimhotep.com. You can visit me at asarimhotep.com, and you'll find out all my other websites and all that other good stuff. But check us out this Thursday as we talk with the elders at the MTOM Earth Center, located out of Chicago, as we discuss Dogon cosmology, spirituality, and how to make all of that practical in our lives. And in the interim time, with these last 5 minutes or so, I guess I will leave you with another track. We played Q-Tip Getting Up earlier, so now I'm going to play the Swiss Beats remix with Eve. I know this is a spiritual show or whatnot, and I turn into like a hot 9-7, saying type joint, but, that's just me from back in my DJing days. But it's all love here. So with that said, thank y'all for listening. God bless y'all. Good night. Peace.